Oh, damn it.
What's the matter, Joe?
This episode is What's the Matter.
Why?
George, I don't name people only famous for murder, and yet this entire film is about two people whose only claim to fame is killing people.
I think Bonnie and Clyde are famous for more than killing.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, bank robberies, for one.
Where they killed people.
Not always.
So they didn't murder every time they robbed the bank. Two Nobel Peace Prize winners there.
You're also forgetting the kidnappings. Bonnie and Clyde were also famous for their kidnappings.
You're not helping.
Kidnapping is not murder. You said you don't want to name people only famous for murder. They aren't only famous for murder. They're also famous for kidnapping. Give them some credit.
Credit?
They stole cars. That's also not murder.
Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde, the true prequel to the Fast and Furious film series. Since when do you like car thieves, mister? I want the guy who stole my car to fall face first into Dave Bautista's after dinner shit at Cracker Barrel.
We're not talking about... Does Dave Bautista eat at Cracker Barrel?
I don't know. Google, does Dave Bautista eat ass? That should give you an answer.
I guess we can forget about ever having ads from Cracker Barrel. Or Dave Bautista, for that matter.
Never mind that. What am I supposed to do?
Let's just do our normal show. You'll just have to make an exception for this episode, that's all.
All right.
By the way, I never said that about Dave Bautista.
Yeah, I know you didn't. It was a joke.
Have you ever eaten ass?
Maybe. What part of Jesus is the Eucharist?
You're out to destroy this podcast, aren't you?
Welcome to Does This Still Work? The podcast that looks at old movies and asks, does this still work? I'm Joe Dixon.
And I'm George Romacka. And today we're discussing Bonnie and Clyde from 1967 and some historical context. First, podcasty stuff. You can reach us at dtswpod@gmail.com, on Facebook, Counter Social, and Letterboxd. Please tell your friends about us and leave 5-star ratings everywhere. You can pick what we watch and get extra per episode content by funding us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/dtswpod. Now, Joe, take us back to 1967, or the year your mom and dad banged and made you.
That was 1967, according to my birth certificate. We're not here to talk about my parents. We're here to talk about bank robberies, because that's at least part of what this movie is about. We covered bank robberies for Inside Man, but that movie was 2006, so we gotta go even further back.
And that was a Spike Lee joint, and I don't think he'd be caught dead making this movie.
But I have no doubt he saw it in film school, because I did.
Mm-hmm.
This is from an Indiana publication called Vidette Messenger of Porter County, which is published today as the Vidette Times. Headline, George.
Vidette. It sounds like a little video.
Could be.
Boom in bank jobs in state.
According to this piece, 1967 was a record year for bank robberies in Indiana. In 1967, they had 31 holdups, one less than the rash of bank jobs they had in the 1930s during the Depression. The numbers are not as high as burglary and fraud, but they were up there. The reason for this is in a quote from a burglar turned bank robber. If you're going to take the risk, you might as well go all out and get a large amount of money. End quote. Which reminds me of the apparently made-up story of the bank robber Willie Sutton, who, when asked why he robs banks, said, "Because that's where the money is." That is such a good quote that I want it to be true, even though I know that he never said it.
It is a really good quote. Like, we should just attribute it to him anyway.
But back to the piece. This year, 1967, Indianapolis, Lafayette, Gary, and South Bend had proved to be the meccas of bank robbers. Of the 31 holdups, 8 were committed in Indianapolis and 5 in South Bend. So a real popular place for the bank robberies.
Mm-hmm.
I should be clear here. Even back in 1967, California outpaced the state and the nation as a whole with 45 heists. For Indiana, the biggest hit in 1967 was a knockover of America Fletcher Bank. The criminals got a haul of $59,237. The bank was near the airport, so it made escape easy. The typical bank robbery of that era, unlike the lone gunman crimes pulled 70% of the time in the rest of the country, involved 2 or 3 people. I don't know if any of the robbers were dating each other, or if one of them couldn't get it up for their sex partner, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads me to my question for you, George. If you robbed a bank, would you be more or less horny?
Depends. How many people did I kill during the robbery?
Let's say you killed no one.
I'd be the same amount of horny as when I went in.
So if you killed someone, how would that affect your level of horniness?
If movies are any indication, especially James Bond pictures, that would make me really, really horny.
Moving on, this next story is from the Chicago Tribune. Headline, please, George.
Accused police killers charged.
This story is some of the first news coverage to occur after the arrest of Ronald Del Rey, Henry Michael Gargano, and Clifton O'Daniels for the Northlake bank robbery. Their crime got them a nice bit of cash, $83,783. It also got them a murder rap.
See, Joe, you have no problem naming people famous for murder if they were also bank robbers.
During their escape, they gunned down 2 cops, Detective Sergeant John Nagel and Patrolman Anthony Perry. I had never heard of this case, but there is a book about it from 2016, The Ruthless Northlake Bank Robbers, a 1967 shooting spree that stunned the region. I don't know if the book is any good, but I got this off Amazon.
I think the title's no good.
You don't like the title? The Ruthless Northlake Bank Robbers?
Not the Ruthless Northlake Bank Robbers. A 1967 shooting spree that stunned the region.
Well, maybe it did stun the region in 67.
Yeah, it's just a clumsy title.
Clumsy subtitle, you mean?
Yes.
Quote, automatic gunfire hammered police arriving at Northlake Bank in response to a silent alarm on the morning of October 27, 1967. The shootout killed 2 officers and injured 2 others. One of the robbers lay wounded as the other 2 fled in a getaway car. The ensuing manhunt tore across state lines and thrust the quiet Illinois community into a national debate over rehabilitated prisoners. 2 of the men were fresh out of jail for bank robbery. Local author Edgar Gamboa Navarre traces this violent Midwestern crime saga from the initial grocery store holdup in Ohio before the bank job to the capture of the murderous gang in Indiana, as well as the conviction and imprisonment. End quote.
Man, it seems like bank robbers also rob grocery stores. It's a consistent thing here.
Yeah. Well, they just tend to rob everywhere. The bank robberies tend to get the most attention, though.
Because that's where the money is.
Because that's where the money is, yes. George, I'm not big on true crime. I don't listen to podcasts on it. I don't watch many documentaries about it. I did read Truman Capote's excellent true crime book, In Cold Blood. Here's some trivia. While he was researching that book, he was assisted by Harper Lee, the future author of To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, I never saw it, but the film Capote covers the writing of that book, In Cold Blood. But anyway, George, do you read true crime or watch shows or listen to podcasts about it?
No. Does not interest me in the slightest.
Yeah, it's never been my thing either. I don't know why it's so popular.
Because we're not everybody, Joe. Some people can't stand cilantro.
Okay, George, tell us about Bonnie and Clyde.
I love black licorice, too. Some people just fucking hate it.
I don't like licorice, period. I don't care what race it is.
This was directed by Arthur Penn and written by David Newman, Robert Benton, and Robert Towne.
Other Arthur Penn films I've seen are The Missouri Breaks, Little Big Man, and The Miracle Worker. For the writers, David Newman wrote the 1978 Superman movie, which this podcast saw for episode 62.
That travesty.
I also saw Superman 2. There is a Western from 1972 called Bad Company that he wrote and that I saw years ago and even owned a VHS tape of. He also wrote What's Up, Doc, a movie that used to be on TV all the time when I was growing up. Robert Benton also wrote Superman with David Newman. They also worked together on Bad Company. Benton also directed that film. His other work I'm familiar with is The Late Show, which he also directed. But Robert Benton might be most famous for writing and directing Kramer vs. Kramer. Now for Robert Towne, we last saw his work for this podcast when we watched Chinatown for episode 73.
So, lots of awards on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly nominations.
Which is ironic. I'm sure you probably get into it later, but this film was initially panned, hated. The studio didn't want to release it. The critics thought it was outrageous and terrible, and then by the end of the year, everything changed and just turned around. It's amazing. It's an amazing story, really.
Mm-hmm. I don't get much into it.
Okay, well, that's what happened, ladies and gentlemen.
So this won an Oscar for Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Estelle Parsons and Best Cinematography. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role for Warren Beatty, Best Actress in a Leading Role for Faye Dunaway, Best Actors in Supporting Roles for Michael J. Pollard and Gene Hackman, Best Director for Arthur Penn, Best Writing Story and Screenplay written directly for the screen, and Best Costume Design. Not only did it win Best Costume Design, but Faye Dunaway insisted on the designer being the designer for her costumes for a bunch of other movies after this one.
Oh, okay.
For the Golden Globes, this was nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama, Best Director, Best Actress in a Drama for Faye Dunaway, Best Actor in a Drama for Warren Beatty, Best Supporting Actor for Michael J. Pollard, who was also nominated for the Best Promising Newcomer, Male.
We don't have that anymore, right? Best Promising Newcomers? That's still a thing?
I don't know. I don't watch award shows, Joe.
Okay.
This is, as of 1992, in the National Film Registry.
All right.
Blurbs. IMDb says, bored waitress Bonnie Parker falls in love with an ex-con named Clyde Barrow, and together they start a violent crime spree through the country, stealing cars and robbing banks.
Okay.
I'll get into it, but I'm going to take issue with anything describing these two as being primarily bank robbers.
Okay.
Amazon says Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway are the legendary Depression-era bandits and lovers in this landmark film that won 2 Academy Awards and triggered a revolution in screen violence. Fair.
That's accurate.
Yeah. And HBO Max says in the early 1930s, a car thief and the daughter of his intended victim team up to become America's most feared and ruthless bank robbers.
No, that's not correct.
Nope.
And for one thing, they weren't the most feared and ruthless. There were a lot of bank robbers in that era, and they were just, the thing that fascinated America about them is that they were a man and a woman doing it, as opposed to just one dude.
Mm-hmm.
And a dude in his gang.
So characters, we're only going to talk about 2 to start with, because they're the only 2 anybody gives a shit about. Clyde Barrow. For the first time in this podcast history, we have a protagonist who's not only not an incel, but, well, a vol-cell? Maybe just a cell. Hell, if it weren't for the almost end of the movie, I'd have him as asexual. Anyway, he's a criminal who imagines himself as a Robin Hood adjacent. Played by Warren Beatty.
Before I get into Warren's credits, explain to me vol-cell?
Voluntarily celibate.
Ah, okay. I'm not sure it's voluntary. It seems to be something's going on there. But anyway.
Like I said, if it wasn't for the almost end of the movie, I'd have him down as asexual.
You know what? I was thinking of that myself as I was watching. I'd seen this movie before, but we'll get into it. Anyway, Warren Beatty.
This is early queer cinema, Joe. No, it's not.
This is our first Warren Beatty movie. I personally have seen Warren Beatty in Bulworth, Dick Tracy, Shampoo, The Parallax View, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and Splendor in the Grass.
And until I was looking at the trivia for this film, I didn't know that Warren Beatty and Shirley MacLaine were siblings.
Wow, Jesus. Okay. It always amazes me the stuff you don't know. Like I would have assumed that was something you did know.
Look, it's not as surprising as me not realizing that Donald Sutherland and Kiefer Sutherland were related. Right? Those two had the same last name to clue me in. These two didn't.
Well, your biggest shocker to me, and this does not top that, the biggest shocker was, of course, when you thought that Angelica Houston was black.
Mm-hmm.
That one is still your best ever.
Then we have Bonnie Parker. She's gorgeous, a waitress, and she's bored with her life. All she needs is a charming criminal to verbally spar with. Played by Faye Dunaway.
We've spoken of Faye Dunaway before. This is not her first podcast appearance. We've seen her on Network for episode 36 and Chinatown for episode 73.
We start with credits over the song Night Wind by Rudy Valley, interspersed with photos taken of and by the real Barrow Gang in the early 1930s. Those photos were developed at a newspaper office by the police from film abandoned at the gang's hideout in Joplin, Missouri. Then we get title cards with photos of the titular criminals giving us some backstory. Bonnie Parker was born in Rowena, Texas, 1910, and then moved to West Dallas. In 1931, she worked in a cafe before beginning her career in crime. Clyde Barrow was born to a family of sharecroppers. As a young man, he became a small-time thief and robbed a gas station. He served 2 years for armed robbery and was released on good behavior in 1931.
The problem with these descriptions, the problem with this film overall, is that it's really bad history, because really don't learn much about Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow.
I am nodding voraciously at what you are saying. Yes, this is bad history.
Incredibly, because, I mean, it doesn't even mention here, Bonnie, while a boy, yeah, she was probably born as a waitress, she was also a married woman. And during her entire time with Clyde, she was married. Not mentioned in the film at all. Doesn't even bring up who her former husband, her husband, period, was. Although, interesting, Bonnie Parker's husband also died in a shootout.
Mm-hmm.
So this girl really knows how to pick them.
Yep. Then we watch Faye Dunaway as Bonnie Parker being all naked and beautiful for a little while, and from what I can tell, she's trying to avoid going through a morning routine.
It's very strategic how naked she is, because we don't see much.
Oh yeah, I get into that in a second.
Okay.
She spots Clyde Barrow from out of her window as he looks like he's about to steal her mother's car. She doesn't bother putting on clothes before she shouts out to him, but this doesn't matter for 2 reasons. 1, the bottom windows are frosted glass, so you can't really see anything anyway. And number 2, Clyde Barrow does not like to have sex, so he's not looking. She throws a single layer of clothing on and goes down to meet him, shaming him for being a thief, which he deflects with, "I was just thinking of buying myself one of these." Whatever passes for an accent with these people. She calls bullshit, and he offers to take her out for a soda. The meet-cute conversation is a lot of her trying to play coy and him being way more interested and persistent than makes sense given his lack of sexual desire for anyone, which will become important in a moment. He reveals that he's been in prison, which entices rather than horrifies. As they walk through town, he tells her that he cut off 2 toes in prison to get out of a work detail. While enjoying their soda pops, he shows her his gun, which may as well have just fucking turned her right on.
Yeah. But you wouldn't have the gumption to use it.
He does in fact have the gumption to use it. To prove it, he robs a grocery store. And to be clear, this is a 1930s grocery store, so it's about the size of a bodega. The owner runs out after him, so Clyde fires a warning shot. Then he starts up the car, like he did in the 1930s, by opening the side of the engine compartment to crank it. As they're getting into the vehicle, they think to exchange names with one another. They take off down some backcountry roads, and Bonnie is desperately and dangerously trying to get Clyde's dick wet, even trying to mount him while driving. Clyde doesn't appreciate this. Not the danger aspect. He just doesn't want to be treated like a piece of meat. He also wants her to know that he's not into men. This is upsetting to her, but not enough to matter more than how much less boring her life is about to get.
If all you want's a stud service, you get on back to West Dallas and you stay there the rest of your life.
Now, the film doesn't address why he is like that, and I don't know that he was actually like that. He could have been like that because he was raped in prison multiple times. He ended up killing the guy with a lead pipe, but never took a rap for it because somebody who was in prison on a life sentence anyway took the rap for it for him.
Clyde's rapist was hated by this other guy, but this other guy didn't want any more extra time, although he was serving life anyway. So he asked, asked Clyde, if you kill him, I'll take the rap for it. And that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to murder someone, you're a rapist, I think that's a fair deal.
Yeah. One strongly supported hypothesis on why exactly Clyde did the things he did was that he wanted revenge on the justice system for what happened to him in prison.
Yep.
The next day, Bonnie wakes up alone on what looks like car seats on the floor of a dilapidated farmhouse. Clyde is apparently an early riser, and Bonnie learns this when she goes outside to find him. Outside, he begins to give her a lesson in firearms use. This is interrupted by the arrival of Otis Harris. Otis was the former owner of this farmhouse, which has been foreclosed on by Midlothian Citizens Bank. Now, this is Depression-era United States, so this was a common occurrence. Otis and his family have stopped by for just one last look at the home. Clyde is surprised by this and draws his gun. Otis obviously poses no threat, and Clyde puts his gun away. Otis tells Clyde the story of why he's there and calls over 1/5 of the black representation in this film, a man named Davis. Now, Otis and Davis both have names as characters in this film, but are not listed in any of the credits, which IMDb purports to be complete.
My guess is that these were, just by the basis on their behavior, these are real people and not actors, and probably Warren Beatty just randomly picked, because we know that the woman who plays the mother is also a real life...
Which was a school teacher that happened to be watching the filming.
Exactly, yeah, they got real people in it, so probably these are real farmers and they used them. Why they're not listed, though, I don't know.
Otis tells Clyde that Davis worked the land with him. Otis begins to walk away, and then Clyde puts 3 rounds into the wooden sign that the bank had placed on the property. Then he offers for Otis to do the same. Otis accepts that offer and shoots the sign too, then shoots out a window, hands the gun to Davis, while Davis shoots another window, resulting in a bunch of internal ricochets damaging a bunch more inside the house that everyone finds mildly amusing, including me. Nobody asks, but this is what Clyde tells Otis that he and Bonnie do.
We rob banks.
That's not necessarily a lie, it's just not true yet. But that's what Bonnie and Clyde go to do next, rob a bank. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, yes, Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker robbed banks. They robbed maybe 9 banks. They also robbed dozens of small stores and homesteads.
And also funeral homes, I read.
Yeah. History, and this movie to an extent, would have us believe that these two were some kind of Robin Hood figures standing up for the little guy. They never gave any of their stolen money to people who needed it.
Well, they gave it to their parents. I don't know if that counts.
That doesn't count.
Okay.
This wasn't a thing of heroes getting a bad rap or anything like that. These two were criminals in this for their own gain, and this movie does not do a good job of making that very important fact clear.
Not at all. And in fact, since we're getting a little bit into the history, needless to say, that is not how Bonnie and Clyde met.
No, they knew each other. They met at a friend's house because, the friend had broken her arm and Bonnie was over there as a caregiver, and Clyde came over because I guess they were already friends.
Yeah, I don't know why that couldn't be in the picture, why they had to do this whole meet cute thing. It seemed unnecessary.
Because I think they were saying, ooh, people know who Bonnie and Clyde is, so this is going to get viewed. Truth, we don't need that as much. That's not necessary.
Well, to be fair, one should never go to a Hollywood movie expecting accurate history. It just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Their first attempt to rob a bank doesn't go very well, as the bank that they try to rob had recently gone under and had no money in it.
Which is also a true thing for the Depression.
Yep.
In the last episode, I was talking with Kit, because she was sitting in for you, George. Mm-hmm. We were talking about banks. You'll have to listen to the episode for why we're talking about banks. We were talking about banks at one point, and she says, oh, but if they rob the bank, they're stealing from you. And I said, well, no, they're not, because it's insured, so they're literally not taking any money from me.
It's insured now.
Yeah, now, but back then.
Because of then.
Yeah, but back then, yeah, they actually would have been stealing from you if they stole from a bank.
Mm-hmm.
So all this, hey, we rob banks, we should be impressed with that. We go, well, you're robbing from these people.
Mm-hmm. So they go to rob a grocery store. One of the workers intervenes, and Clyde has to pistol whip him to get away, with none of the groceries, not even the 4 fried pies that he was trying to steal.
Going back to how we do it now, you're specifically told if someone steals from a store, do not chase them. Do not go, you as in if you're an employee there.
Yeah.
Don't hit them with a butcher knife.
That's what insurance is for.
Yes, exactly.
In the car, he frames this as just trying to get something to eat, as he complains about the outcome. I rolled my eyes so hard, I think I sprained one.
Why? Why would you roll your eyes at that? He just wants something to eat.
He knows what he's doing. This is not how normal people acquire things to eat from one another.
You mean you don't pull a gun on the grocer? Is that how you pay for food these days?
No, Joe.
You're so woke, George.
I must be. They have some car trouble and bring it to a mechanic who diagnoses dirt in the fuel line. Bonnie gets some jollies from telling him that the car is stolen, and he seems amused. I guess this is how sociopaths find each other. The mechanic is C.W. Moss, and he's played by Michael J. Pollard.
He was in Dick Tracy and The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. He was also in episodes of Wings, Simon and Simon, Get Christy Love, and a couple of other TV shows, but I really don't know much of his work.
He's a sidekick and getaway driver and is an amalgam of real-life Barrow gang members. Now a trio, they go try robbing a bank again. CW is supposed to keep their car running out front, and he interprets this as find a parking space.
I wonder if that actually happened. He said, "Oh, you guys go ahead and run the bank. I'm going to find a sweet space. Look at this. I can't pass this up."
Inside, it's a pretty straightforward robbery where nobody is hurt and there's no resistance. They get outside and the alarm sounds. It takes them a second to spot CW in their car. It takes more than a second for CW to get the car out of the parking spot he'd found, to the amusement of 2/5 of the black representation in the film as bystanders.
As they stand and watch this man smash into the car in front of him and then smash into the car behind him as he tries to get out of the parking space.
Mm-hmm.
Which is how I failed my driving exam.
Really?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I was told that I couldn't steer the car properly, but I didn't actually crash into anything.
Okay. This is all amusing until the bank manager runs out and jumps onto the car's running board. For this, Clyde shoots him in the face. To me, a 41-year-old in 2022, this wasn't anything super jarring, graphically speaking. To the audience in 1967, this was positively gruesome. Scenes like this are why this film is considered to be one of the first in the American new wave of filmmaking, made possible by a shift from studios to directors in who was calling the shots. I'll boil it down to this. You can get away with a lot more when you aren't creating art by committee. And they duck down in a movie theater so that Clyde can berate CW to tears over his parking thing.
And the weirdest part of that whole scene, I mean, it's understandable why Clyde would be upset and CW was not too bright, so he's just going to take the abuse. But Bonnie doesn't give a shit. She's like, "Will you guys be Clyde? I'm trying to watch the movie."
We're in the money.
We're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. That should be our karaoke staple. I wonder if that's a karaoke anywhere, if they have that.
I am 90% sure they do. That evening, Bonnie and Clyde try to have sex. It doesn't happen, and that's it. I don't know what to do with that.
Well, that's what happens. Nothing happens. She wants some loving, and he can't give it to her.
Mm-hmm. Which he seems like, he's make-outy. He does that just fine. He's cuddly. He just, when she starts working her way down like she's going to go down on him, he's like, ah! Which, again, makes me think that this was something, like he might have been forced to do something like that, and he can't. So,
He could have PTSD of sexual assault.
And that could, Jesus Christ, could you imagine if a movie was made based on this character which dealt with that? That would be a freaking amazing film.
I think that would be too much of a breakthrough for 1967. I don't know when we as a nation finally acknowledged that men could get raped, but I'm pretty certain the 60s was not that time.
I'm not sure we've all figured it out yet. The next day, they meet up with Clyde's brother, Buck, and his wife, Blanche. Clyde and his brother, Buck, are cut from the same cloth, but ended up with very different women. At least in the movie. He's played by Gene Hackman.
We've seen Mean Gene before. For this podcast, we've seen him in The Birdcage for episode 25, Superman for episode 62, and Young Frankenstein for episode 131. My God, there's a lot of Superman connections in this I didn't even realize.
Yep.
The writers wrote Superman, and Gene Hackman was in Superman. It's interesting. Don't know if it means anything, but there it is.
Blanche is a preacher's daughter, and she's fine until anything exciting happens.
Oh my God, this woman screams so much in this movie.
Now, the real Blanche Barrow was not at all as depicted in this film. Arthur Penn made the character a hysterical mess to make Bonnie look cooler by comparison. Blanche is played by Estelle Parsons.
She was in Dick Tracy, another connection that comes up a lot. She was in For Pete's Sake, and she was in The Watermelon Man. I also saw her on Roseanne. You ever heard of The Watermelon Man, George?
That wasn't Gallagher, was it?
Well, reasonable assumption, but no, it had nothing to do with Gallagher. Watermelon Man was a 60s film. Maybe we should watch it sometime. I'm sure it's dated poorly, but it's about this white man who wakes up one day and he's black.
That sounds fucking amazing.
Maybe we'll check it out.
If you did that right, it could be amazing in a good way. Any other way, it's going to be an amazingly bad movie. The reunion is fun for the guys, who seem to have barely anything to say, so they playfully punch each other. They do a quick recap of everything we already know. A rivalry begins between Bonnie and Blanche, the latter thinking that the former and Clyde are going to corrupt Buck, who's been to prison and who she's hoping to influence to be a good citizen. Again, this was invented by the director. Blanche wasn't even a minister's daughter in real life.
Oh, I did not know that. I do know, she complained about the depiction because it made her look like an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and apparently Bonnie liked having her around because it gave her another woman to talk to.
Yeah. The five, let's not forget CW, rent a house as a hideout in Joplin, Missouri. Way before their time, before COVID made everybody order their groceries to be delivered, they do that via telephone. The delivery boy offers to bring the groceries in. Bonnie declines, seeing as how they're not exactly unrecognizable criminals and she doesn't want him seeing all of their faces. The kid finds the behavior suspicious and tells the cops once he's away from there. Most likely, he thinks that they're just smugglers, moonshiners.
Yeah, white folks are even more nosy back then than they are today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Karens. Like, what do you care what's going on in there? In that house? Oh, it takes suspicious to me and call the cops.
There was less to do back then. When the cops eventually show up, it turns into a firefight. Some cops get killed. We get to see Blanche being a hysterical shrew about the whole thing. Not that she wouldn't have cause to be that way, but they all manage to get away unscathed.
Apparently, in real life, something like this did happen, but instead of her running out screaming like a maniac,
she was
actually
chasing after her dog.
Yes.
Snowball. They pull off somewhere to take a break and are happened upon by Sheriff Frank Hamer. He's played by Denver Pyle.
It's Uncle Jesse from the Dukes of Hazzard. I didn't realize this was him until I saw this movie. I'd seen this movie before, but I guess I'd forgotten that Uncle Jesse's in this.
Not to be confused with Uncle Jesse from Full House. That was John Stamos, who wouldn't be caught dead with this guy's mustache.
No, not a chance, no.
The bastard is lucky to live through what he experiences. The gang decides to disarm him and take pictures with him that they can send to newspapers to discredit him. They all have a good laugh about it. Bonnie even smooches the guy. Then, surrounded, outgunned, and while he is shackled, he decides to spit in Bonnie's face. This sets Clyde off, and Buck is barely able to stop him from killing the sheriff. Instead, they throw him in a boat that they find and just send him off down the river.
Still handcuffed.
They go after another bank. Again, statistically, they'd be knocking over at least 10 grocers between these bank jobs. In the bank, Clyde does the lowest level of Robin Hooding possible by telling a farmer to hold on to his dollar instead of taking it from him. That farmer will later say that they did right by him. Clyde also, on purpose, doesn't murder a security guard. The brothers and Bonnie make it out with a bunch of cash. On his way out, Buck takes the security guard's gun and glasses. This results in a car chase, with bullets flying until they reach the state line. The cops don't follow into Oklahoma because jurisdiction is a thing that matters. This is a legit way that Bonnie and Clyde managed to stay on the lam for 2 years. They were able to exploit this.
Yeah, cops were not expected to go across state lines, and there wasn't much of an FBI back then, so yeah. Criminals could go across state lines, and the cops were not expected to pursue them, and they didn't contact the people in that state, which is actually kind of weird.
Well, Bonnie and Clyde, what they did was galvanize law enforcement.
Oh, yes, sure, because it made them look like fools.
After them, bank robbery became a federal crime. After them, police stations started using radios. Like, Bonnie and Clyde made it harder for every criminal that came after them.
Yeah, there were a lot of holes in the system, and they took full advantage of it, but although I'm not sure they fully realized that.
They took advantage of holes in the system, and then the system put holes in them. They take a break to split the booty amongst themselves. After the counting has started, Blanche makes a big deal about getting a share, even though she didn't really do much. She was neither in the bank doing any of the work, nor the getaway driver. Her justification is that she was at risk just like the rest of them, and they want to shut her up, so they give her some money. And this is just fuel for the Bonnie Blanche fire.
Her behavior really doesn't make any sense. Who cares about the split? You guys are all together anyway, so it doesn't... it's not like you're putting your money and you're going to put it in a bank somewhere. It's like he might as well have kept it all to himself because they're all spending on each other. What do? They get these groceries and then they hold out at some hotel somewhere. So I don't know what the splitting stuff comes from. Who cares?
Yeah, they're certainly not going to go put it in a bank because they might forget that they put it there and then rob themselves. And now for something completely different. We've seen them do robberies. We've seen them do car chases. We've seen them do car thefts. We have even seen them do murder. We have seen them try and fail to have sex. What we have not seen yet is a kidnapping. So, needing to swap wheels because license plates are a thing in the 1930s, they go after a car parked in a neighborhood. Across the street from this car are two people making out on a front porch swing. One participant in the making out is definitely more enthused than the other. That's Eugene Grizzard, played by Gene Wilder.
For this podcast, we've seen Gene Wilder in everything you always want to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask for episode 19. Blazing Saddles for episode 30, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory for episode 93, and Young Frankenstein for episode 131.
While he had done some TV work, this film was Gene Wilder's cinematic debut.
Ah, okay.
His lady friend is Velma Davis, played by the amazingly named Evans Evans.
I don't know her work.
Eugene notices the theft in progress and decides his car is more important than the sex that he wasn't going to have anyway.
You don't know.
I know, she was not. So they take off after the gang in Velma's car.
Is this what you would have done if you saw someone stealing your car, George? Since this has actually happened to you?
Well, I didn't see them stealing my car, Joe, and I didn't have another car to chase them down with.
If you did, would you have done that?
I don't know, Joe. Depends on how armed I was. They're getting close when Velma brings up that these could be dangerous people with guns. Eugene decides that his own life is probably worth more than his car, so he turns around to drive back home. The gang sees this as a fun opportunity to mess with somebody, so they chase Eddie and Velma down to kidnap them. After a while, they're all good friends having a good old time and just laughing it up. They even go get burgers together. Everything is great until somebody asks Eddie what he does for a living. Eddie is an undertaker. This is when Bonnie decides the fun has to stop, so they kick Eddie and Velma out of the car and drive off. I am going to read now from the IMDb trivia section. The Gene Wilder Evans Evans sequence is based on the kidnappings of Undertaker H.D. Darby and his acquaintance Sophia Stone near Ruston, Louisiana on the late afternoon of April 27, 1933 by the Barrow Gang who had stolen their car. They were both released unharmed several hours later. According to Darby, one of the Barrow Gang members asked what he did for a living, and when he replied that he was an undertaker, Bonnie Parker allegedly said to him in a sarcastic tone that, "You may have to work on me someday." The following year, H.D. Darby was indeed one of the coroners that worked on Bonnie and Clyde after they had been killed by the police.
And what, I mean, I don't know if IMDb knew this or not, or maybe my information is wrong. My understanding is they were terrified. They didn't become buddies with the Barrow Gang. They thought they would get murdered at any moment.
I believe that 100%, that this movie is not accurately portraying the kidnapping of these people. The next morning, Bonnie is apparently trying to walk back to West Dallas because she misses her mom. In reality, the Barrow Gang spent a lot of time visiting their families. It's a large part of how their movements were able to be predicted in order for them to be ended the way they got ended. But whatever. Clyde's like, yeah, okay, we'll go visit your mom.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are wanted by the police, the first thing they're going to do is go check your family, okay? I remember years ago, there was a story of these three guys that broke out of prison. And what I found interesting about it is that they were all different races. One was Asian, one was black, and one was white. Which doesn't really mean anything to the story. I just thought that was interesting. But anyway, they break out of jail, and how the cops find them is that they just went back to the neighborhoods these guys all lived in and just picked them up again. Because, yeah, that's the first place the cops are going to look, where you came from.
That's where all your stuff is.
Yes. And also true of a movie that I saw that was based on a book called The Falcon and the Snowman. About these two guys. One guy was a drug addict, and the other worked for the feds. And he was sort of almost like a Snowden type guy, only much shadier. And he was like selling secrets to the Russians and stuff. And eventually they get caught. They called him a snowman because he thought of cocaine. So anyway, so he gets jail time. So does the Falcon. But the Falcon escapes. But they finally find him because he liked falconeering and they just went to falconering events.
Oh, yeah.
They found him there.
He had a very specific hobby.
Yes. So it made it much easier to find him. Sorry, just thought I'd share that with everyone. Help the criminal element out there. Do not, if you're wanted by the cops, you can kiss your family, your friends, everything goodbye. That life is now over, unless you want to turn yourself in, because You go back, you are going to be arrested.
So they go to visit with the family, and Bonnie gets to see all of her nieces and nephews and her mother, who doesn't just absolutely hate Clyde's guts. Their next hideout also gets raided by the cops, and this one does not go as well as the last ones. In their attempt to escape, Buck is shot in the head. Not only that, but shrapnel glass basically blinds Blanche. They put up a good fight, but it takes a toll. They have to try camping out with their cars in the middle of a field, but that doesn't go very well because in the morning they are surrounded. CW, Bonnie, and Clyde are separated from Blanche and Buck. Buck dies surrounded by the police, with Blanche not really watching, but hearing.
That part apparently is true, that she did call and was screaming for him when he was dying, Daddy, Daddy, don't die.
Mm-hmm.
Such a weird thing when people call their lovers Daddy and Mommy. I don't know what the fuck that's about. Gross.
The other three don't get away clean either. While they're fording a river, Bonnie takes a bullet to the chest. Blanche gets captured and gives the cops CW's name, which nobody had actually known yet. CW is driving them, and he stops at a carpetbagger camp to get some water, and then brings them all to his father's house for shelter. And I might have to stop and define carpetbagger for a second.
Sure.
Because I realize I know that from my middle school social studies classes, but I'm not sure other people would remember what that word is. During the Depression, people were forced out of their homes and sometimes had to just pack their belongings and take them with them. One way you do that is put all your shit in the middle of a carpet and tie it up and then carry that. And that's what a carpet bag was.
Okay. But does a carpetbagger date back to the Civil War? Am I getting that wrong?
You might not be wrong, but it's the same thing.
Okay.
Because the Civil War, war also causes people to have to relocate in a hurry. Especially when you have somebody going scorched earth like we did. Who the fuck was that?
You mean Sherman?
Him and his March to the Sea shit. I mean, it worked.
Which is excellent.
It worked.
Excellent work.
It worked fucking well. But, yeah. Ivan Moss looks kind of like Danny DeVito and looks out for his son, though he goes about it like an abusive asshole. He's played by Dub Taylor.
I've seen him in a few things. He was in The Wild Bunch, another movie like this one that got denounced for its violence. He was also in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, Maverick, and Support Your Local Sheriff.
Ivan makes a show of being supportive, but really does not like who his son is palling around with. Mostly, he doesn't like the big-ass chest tattoo that his son got with Bonnie's encouragement. When the cops contact him, based on Blanche's information, he works out a deal with them. Leniency for his son, and he will give them Bonnie and Clyde on a platter. Before that, we get to hear some poetry that Bonnie really did write that was published in newspapers about their criminal lives. It wasn't published because they sent it in, it was published because it was recovered along with the photographic film at the Joplin safe house.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff published about them in terms of the letters and the pictures all came out after they were dead.
And Bonnie and Clyde even managed to have sex in a field. So good for them, I guess. He even does the thing was it good? Was I good? Did I do a good job afterwards? Not that I identify at all with that impulse.
The whole thing about Clyde's sexuality was probably started by the character of CW, not literally the character, but the composite of him, the two guys they based this on. But I don't know why they would talk shit about his sexuality.
It wasn't. It wasn't started by them. It wasn't started by anybody in their circle. In fact, one of the last gang members to be surviving did an interview where he addressed it, and he's like, we have no idea. None of us would ever question him on that count because the rumors were that he was gay. And what I think is that came out because anytime you have a cultural movement, and Bonnie and Clyde were a cultural icon, a lot of people liked them. You're also going to have people who don't, and they're going to go the opposite.
You think it's just a slur on him?
Yeah, just slander.
The authorities?
Might have even been started by the cops to throw a wet blanket on whatever fire they may have started.
The Bonnie and Clyde may have started.
Yeah. So Ivan tells his son to stay in town and don't come back with them. He sets up on a road feigning a flat tire.
You have to wonder why, in this movie, not forget real life, but in the movie, why he doesn't warn them. To see this character obviously likes them very much. He's friends with them. He could just give them the heads up, hey, my dad, he did this. I'm really sorry, but you guys got to get out of here. Of course, that would make it a different movie.
the way the movie plays it, I think his character thought that the ambush was supposed to happen in the town. And when he watched them drive away, he thought that they were getting away.
Oh, interesting interpretation. Okay, maybe.
When Bonnie and Clyde pull up to help Ivan, the bushes erupt in gunfire and the pair are shot to death. The last 2/5 of black representation in the film are driving up the road and stop to witness this shooting. They go to examine the wreckage, and so do the cops. And then that's it. Abruptly, the movie is over. The end.
So, George, does this still work?
I'm weighing entertaining versus truthful.
Oh, it loses on truthful, so...
It loses on that, but it is an entertaining movie.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the things that it was scandalous for back then,
Yeah.
It's nothing shocking now.
Not at all.
It not being shocking doesn't make it not work.
Right.
I'm leaning towards it works because it's a solid movie.
Mm-hmm.
The storytelling is solid. The acting is fucking phenomenal. It's a good film. It's just not reflective of... Change the names of the fucking characters. Make them somebody other than Bonnie and Clyde. Right? If you do that, I have no problem with it. But no, so you know what? I'm going to say no. Because it's Bonnie and Clyde, it has a responsibility to be anything resembling reality. And this was not close enough to make it work.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair enough. But I do disagree with you. I think it does work as a film. Is history? No, very bad. But and yes, this is, if you want to find out about Bonnie and Clyde, you better go read up on them because you're not going to find much here. But as a movie, and as this thing being in the National Film Registry, which I agree with, it is a very important film. I think people should see it. But as a film alone, besides its historical importance, it's a good picture. Although I was confused about one thing. I don't know if you picked up on that. The whole thing with the Gene Wilder and the, which is obviously meant to be somewhat of a music part of the film. His whole thing there is supposed to be funny, but when she says his girlfriend or whatever, the woman he's smooching on, says she's 33, and he has this weird shot of his face. I'm like, what's wrong with 33? Mm-hmm. I mean, I get it. It's in the 30s, so I guess they wanted women to be younger than the men, but it was just such a weird thing, because this is like looking all odd and everything. After she mentioned she's 33 years old, like, what's the big deal? So that's something I don't think modern audiences would get. I'm not even sure they would get it in 1967, to be honest, but I guess they did today. That it would just be weird. Like, why is 33? What's wrong with 33? But other than that,
that's a good question, Joe.
But that's a quibble. Other than that, I think it's a good film. I think it still works. Okay, George, what's up next?
Next week, we will be talking about Get on the Bus from 1996.
Are you familiar with this picture?
Nope. I'm only familiar with it as something that I try to do when I'm going for a bus.
It is a Spike Lee picture, so we got another Spike flick in the mix.
Yay.
Okay, so I guess that's it for this episode. I'm Joe Dixon. Thanks for listening.
And I'm George Romacka. Thanks for listening indeed, because if a podcast drops and there's no one around to hear it, it's just another collection of ones and zeros that doesn't matter.
You've heard the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Bonnie and Clyde are the Barrow Gang. I'm sure you all have read how they rob and steal, and those who squeal are usually found dying or dead. They call them cold-hearted killers. They say they are heartless and mean. But I say this with pride, that I once knew Clyde when he was honest and upright and clean. But the law fooled around, kept taking him down and locking him up in a cell, till he said to me, I'll never be free, so I'll meet a few of them in hell. If a policeman is killed in Dallas and they have no clue to guide, if they can't find a fiend, they just wipe their slate clean and hang it on Bonnie and Clyde. If they try to act like citizens and rent them a nice little flat, about the third night they're invited to fight by a subgun's rat-a-tat-tat. Someday they'll go down together, they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde.
You've been listening to Does This Still Work? Produced by Joe Dixon and George Romacka. The hosts can be reached via social media, email, or the contact page at dtswpod.com. Be good to yourself and others, because that still works.
That's another thing that it's probably too early to get into this, but
I said that to myself at that moment when I was writing the script.
But the whole thing about Clyde Burrow and his lack of...
stop. We'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, George, for $1 million, if you had to stay 1 month confined to a cabin with plenty of food and water and heat, but no internet, phone, or TV, could you do it?
So what is your favorite thing that you own and why?
Now, George, what is the smelliest cheese that you would be willing to eat?
So, Joe, what is your most hated chore and why?